hear how to break down boundaries and live by the platinum rule. Dr. Diane Strachowski is up next.
Hey, Dr. Diane, welcome to the call. How are you?
I'm good, Jeff. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm doing even better now because I'm about ready to learn a whole bunch of stuff.
Okay.
And so just to give a little context for the listeners, that obviously have no idea who this Dr. Diane person is that they're listening to right now, give us a little bit of context on, who you are, your story, your journey, and, how you got to where you are now.
Well, okay, Jeff. So I currently am I'm the Back to Love doc on Instagram, and I am a licensed psychologist. I have been actually licensed in the state of California for 20 years now.
Wow.
I practice in my work. I work with couples and with singles, really in relationships, but I also work with depression, anxiety, eating disorders, sleeping problems, lots of behavioral different issues, and mainly I do some research, and mainly I work in private practice.
Okay. And so what really pushed you into the field? Because people don't wake up and be like, I'm going to do this. Usually,
no. It was a long, well, I can, I guess I can start with the beginning. So I was born and raised in Chicago, and my parents were immigrants. Both of my parents were from Poland. Not an easy start. We struggled financially. I was one of 5 children, although I went to Catholic school, though, but went to inner city schools in Chicago, went to Lane Tech, which was like a technical school, and then went to undergrad in Chicago. And the truth is, Jeff, I fell in love with my first psychology class. I actually went into undergraduate not knowing what I wanted to do, but my parents really stressed education.
Mm-hmm.
So even though they didn't help me.
Well, yeah, that's really, especially for immigrants,
Absolutely.
Education is the way out.
Yeah. I mean, my father was a plumber. My mother didn't work. And we knew some way, again, even though they didn't have the financial means, that we knew the expectation was that we went to school. So yeah. I worked all through college and didn't go away to school, but went to U of I in Chicago while I was working as a waitress, and took my first psychology class, and I fell in love with my first professor, Penny Prather, and it was a Psych 101 class, and I just thought, wow, she's really cool. And I just said, I think there's something here for me. And I really enjoyed her class and started working in her lab. And I worked on a crisis intervention hotline in inner city Chicago. And people would call in trouble. And funny, this goes back to then even my earlier family. There's also no accidents, right?
Yeah.
And I was the middle child. And everyone always came to me. Somehow they saw me as that person, Yeah. I was always tall for my age too. And interesting how people think you're older than you are. Because I was taller than my older sister. And so everybody assumed I was, older than her. And in my family, I just was that person. I was also a pretty carefree, happy-go-lucky kind of kid. And I think people just came to me with their problems, or I was like the family mediator in many ways.
People could kind of just approach you and the walls just naturally disappeared.
Yeah, like somehow I found it easy to read people. I
Okay.
think I just had a sense of even like knowing when my mother was upset or when things weren't quite right. I had that sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that becomes your calling, right? When you have natural instincts in that area, and then blend in the actual science of it that I got exposed to in undergraduate, then I thought there's something here. And then working on the hotline, I thought, well, I actually have some talent too.
Yeah.
So, right, you have to have a passion for it. It has to fit your personality, but then you have to figure out, am I good at this?
Yeah, it's kind of what they say, like for a professional athlete or in any athlete, really. It's like, talent will only get you so far, because
That's right.
hard work beats talent when talent won't work hard,
Absolutely. Great quote. Yeah.
you know. And
Yeah.
so really you kind of realized that you had this passion that,
Yeah.
of being able to do this, and you knew you had a skill for it, and you started working on that. But what really, because I think a lot of times when somebody really starts making the impact is when
Yeah.
something happens on a personal level. Because
Yeah.
that's that extra fuel on the fire where it's like, well,
That's,
now I get it. Because it's not just book knowledge, it's like I have
that's
been through it.
Well, Jeff, and the interesting thing too is that sometimes you come to that and you don't realize it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, like looking backwards, then when well, first off, I used to joke around that I became a psychologist because of my Snoopy sheets. You know, I know that's like really young, but the Peanuts, and I had the Snoopy sheets, and they had Lucy that said like psychiatry 5 cents. Do
Uh-huh.
you remember that little anyway, it was this little cartoon, and I just remember that, and it was like the first book I ever read on my own, and it was called Happiness Is, and it was just a really sweet book, but somehow I identified with this Lucy character, and maybe in my subconscious mind had the sense I would be a psychologist. I don't know. But then um, early in my life, when I was 12, actually, we had a really significant house fire um, in Chicago. And it was in the basement of our house, and my dad was working on this table, and the fumes from this flammable glue
Mm-hmm.
ignited with our gas stove, and we had an explosion, and I was standing like right next to it was like doing the dishes, and then this table that my dad was working on started on fire, right, from
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
explosion. And so I ran across the table to go get my younger sister. So I was 12 and she was 4, and ran across the table to go get her. But then I had the feeling we were trapped, of course, because we're in a basement, and the flames are kind of blocking the exit. And that was that moment in my life. I really thought, oh my gosh, my short little life was flashing before my eyes. And I also remember the stop, drop, and roll
Yeah.
they teach you in school. And so I grabbed my sister, and we were in our bathroom for God knows how many minutes it was, but it felt like an eternity. And we got down, and so we were able to breathe a little bit. And thank goodness there wasn't a lot to actually burn, right? It was just the table that was on fire. And so my dad himself, like, quickly hooked up the hose somehow and put the fire out. And so we were able to walk out. But by that point, the neighbors had heard us screaming, and the fire department came, and it was really
it escalated.
well, yeah, and it was a trauma because
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know, like my whole family got kind of dissipated in this, but my older sister actually was burned also, and then I was in my neighbor's basement, and the firemen were there, and my hair was singed, and my legs were burned, and just being taken away in an ambulance, and it was a very traumatic experience. And then I was in the hospital actually for 2 months.
Wow.
And that was a long time. And in fact, my sister then was burned less than I was, but we were in the same room for a month. And it was summertime, and it really, it was more the emotional piece, and yes, the physical piece. I had to do physical therapy and learn how to walk, and but I definitely had trauma, because in the hospital I would wake up and feel like the room was on fire. And the problem, and how I link this back to psychology, Jeff, is that I knew even then as a child that something was wrong because no one ever talked to me.
Mm-hmm.
Not a single person came and said, like, well, how are you doing? Because the other part of it is not just the physical wounds. It's like,
the
and
mental.
I felt,
Yeah.
well, the mental part too is because I felt so bad for my father, because he would come and sit in the hospital room and just, oh my God, he was so depressed because he felt like it was his fault, right?
Yeah.
And to see your children in pain, and it was really traumatic for our family, because at the same time, like, we were having relatives coming from Poland the next day, and so our house is damaged, and we've got people, and then I had two younger siblings, two older siblings, and so it really
It was like the world as you knew it was falling apart.
oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't put this all together, right? So how something can happen to us but we don't quite realize. I didn't put this piece together until I was already an undergraduate studying psychology. And then I knew that, I was smart, that I was good at school.
Yeah.
And I knew that I wanted to do something more even. And with an undergrad in psychology, it's really hard to do more. You really have to go to graduate school. And then in graduate school was when I think I flashed back on this memory, like, my God, nobody was really there for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to make sure that doesn't happen for other people.
No, that's so good.
But then it was hard to talk about it too, because of, I think, my father's guilt and shame, and there was a lot of heaviness about this. And then after graduate school, well, actually kind of in between graduate school, I moved out to California. And interesting enough, I was working with children. I was working at this residential treatment center for emotionally disturbed kids. And we went to this rodeo.
Mm-hmm.
And at the rodeo, there was a sign for a burn camp for children. And I was like, oh, there's a camp? I'm like, oh my God.
Sign me up.
But I was then going to be a counselor, right?
Yeah.
So I'm an adult now, but I'm like, oh my gosh, like, had I known, and back in the time, there was no such thing as a camp for kids in Chicago, because I was the only person that I knew, right, that had been burned. And then that was hard. In high school, I remember distinctly we had to go swimming, and I asked my plastic surgeon, like, can I have a note to get out of swimming? And he said no. And I cried in his office and said, you have to get me a note. I don't want to go swimming.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, sweetheart, if you don't jump in the pool and get over it, it's going to be a bigger problem. And I was pissed.
That's so true.
Right? I was pissed, but I did it. And, some girls were like, ew, what happened to you? And I thought, oh my God, how mean, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we would call it bullying now. And I just looked him in the eye and I said, I almost died in a house fire. And that shut him up pretty quickly.
What are you going to say to that? Well,
but,
I swim. It's like you can't say anything back to that.
People are ignorant, right?
Yeah.
And but in the same time, Jeff, if that had not happened, I don't think I'd be the strong person I am. And I feel like it has also, out of that adversity and out of that hardship, I also have a lot more empathy for people. And so I feel like I can use this across the board for all my clients, right? I don't have to be in a depression to understand what that's like. I don't have to have the exact experience.
Yeah.
But
You went through your own.
That's right.
Yeah, you went through your own version of, what they're dealing with. Like, I didn't deal with that directly, but believe me, I went through some stuff,
Right. Right.
And
And it's only when you've got stuff that you have to overcome that you really know how strong you are.
yeah,
And
it's adversity.
that's exactly right. And so out of that, and there's also emotional stuff in your own family, as we all have. And I think what's been so amazing for me now is, with so much more insight into my own background and now weaving it all together,
Mm-hmm.
I take that adversity, finding what you're passionate about. So now it's been 20 years that I've been a volunteer for the Alyssa Ann Roosh Burn Foundation.
Okay. Wow.
Back to the burn camp. So then the first year I was going to be a volunteer at the burn camp, I did talk to my dad, and I said, "Hey, Dad, I'm going to this burn camp." And he said, "Now don't get too emotional." And I was like, "Oh God."
What age was that again? The
What
first burn
happened
camp.
when I was 12.
12.
I was 12. And
So did that first camp? Sorry, I know you're still going, but this question keeps popping in my head, and it's like, oh my God, I really want to know what happened. Did that first camp really help you work through some of your own issues?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, so I went not prepared at all, right? I showed up here. I'm the camp counselor, but I will tell you, it was so illuminating for me, because it was amazing that all these children who had, and we're talking some serious burns, and everybody was at different stages of their treatment, right? I mean, some had pretty fresh scars and with bandages, and others were years out. But to see them all together playing and having fun and not being body conscious or aware,
Mm-hmm.
and having that support, I mean, wow, that just opened my eyes. And I tell you, every year I go back, we have what's called a young adult summit.
Mm-hmm.
In California, and now I work with kids specifically the age that I was, and the kids are anywhere from 16 to 20, and they come and we give them life skills, but they now have, because they went to camp and they continue on this young adult path, and they can become counselors themselves. I mean, it's so amazing for me to see, with the support, how that helps them with getting support early. Again, what I didn't have.
Yeah. And that's right in that transition age too.
Oh, yeah.
Because you're hitting up your 12, 13, you're starting the teenage years, but really that, 14, 15, 16 through, right when you're about to get into your 20s, that's a really big transition age.
Oh, yeah.
Because now you're super aware of what other people are thinking about you.
Oh.
And you're hypersensitive. You're overly sensitive to it.
Oh, Jeff, the things that I went to, the extent that I went to try to cover my scars. I mean, I can't tell you. It was in, I think, my 8th grade graduation. I wore like leg makeup and 2 pairs of pantyhose. Okay, literally, like one on top of the other, because I didn't want anyone to see.
Yeah, and especially nowadays with social media and everybody is just so about looks, and like, oh my gosh, what do I? And so it's so like I'm fascinated that you are just so like what this camp is doing. You're giving people the tools, like, hey, you're giving them life tools.
Yeah, and I mean, I think back to it. If I had the camp myself, right, when I was 12, I wouldn't have then like worn 2 pairs of pantyhose. I would have.
You'd be like, this is me. What's up?
Right. I would, exactly, because now I'm saying we also, though social media is depicting a lot of beauty, we also have a lot of body consciousness, body positive. We have, models who don't have perfect skin. We have, there's so many different ways to look at beauty.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the positive piece of it.
Oh,
too.
for sure. Like I've had, amputees on the calls.
Oh yeah,
You know, and so it's like, hey, they grew up with this, or you know, you
that's
have like David Brown, like where he was able to see, and then he lost his sight
yeah,
while he's growing, and but now he's the world record holder for being the fastest blind man alive, and the only one to run it. I think it was sub 11 or sub 10 in the 100 and 200, and he's a world record holder, and he's like, no, I continually am trying to beat myself,
that's
and
right.
it's like you can't even see, but it's like, so you know, and just not letting not letting the limitations that other
That's
people
right.
use as a filter, because that's all they can do, not letting that affect you, and just being self-aware on who you are.
That's right. So how that came together for me, and then I will also say, back to the formative years, I think intimacy is a big part of that too, because then when you also have a scar that you can hide,
Mm-hmm.
and we've talked about this at the camps, those people who have, for instance, facial scars, burns that you can't hide. Interesting enough, people who can't hide their disability have more experience in talking about it, right? So in fact, they have less anxiety because they have to deal with it every single day. They have to deal with the stares and the looks, and so they get more practiced in it.
Yep.
Versus someone who can hide their scars. Think about it. It's like, okay, you like me now, but when you see my scars, you may not like me then.
Yeah.
So it's this level of anxiety that you have that something might change, right? Like you might think differently of me now that you know this. And so it's a different type of vulnerability that you get into when it's something that you can hide.
Yeah. And so when do you, when you know, in your practice and helping
Yeah.
people, you know, at the campaign, so you probably see this, so I don't know
Yeah.
if there's even an answer to this, but
Yeah.
when do you see kind of the switch flip for people being so worried about what other people think, you know,
Yeah.
external influences versus just being acceptance of this is who I am, and you know, take it or leave it. Like, this is who I am, and I'm not changing, because obviously it's going to be so different for each person and
Yeah.
their journey and what type of, you know,
Absolutely.
scars they
Yeah.
have, you know, whether they're visible,
Right.
whether they're not, like you said. But
Yeah.
I think so. Is there a general answer? I'm like, it's when this person does this, you know?
This is great, Jeff. You're right. I don't have the answer because it's so personal for everyone. I know for me, it happened when I was 12, and I'm trying to think, when did I actually flip over that I stopped caring? Well, here I moved from Chicago where part of it was I really couldn't go to the beach because I wasn't supposed to get a lot of sun exposure.
Mm-hmm.
So, that was sort of uncomfortable physically. But then probably for me, I have to say, I think it was more like my late 20s, I hate to say, where I finally said, what the heck am I doing? This is just uncomfortable. Why do I care? That just happened. And I don't think it was just one event. It was just sort of a progression.
Yeah.
But what I see for these kids at the camp is that the more exposure they have to the camp and keep coming back to the camp, and then knowing other friends who have been burned, and seeing other very courageous people, we model from them, right? We have something we call mirror neurons. And when we see this person, for instance, who has like tremendous scars, who has no hands, for instance, they're an amputee on top of it, and you see them doing things, you think, my stuff is nothing, right? So when you have a basis of comparison, then you stop feeling sorry for yourself.
So it's really like you're facilitating an environment of exposure.
That's exactly right.
So it's like it's not normal for you to be hiding yourself here. Like, being normal is just being who you are and embracing it and moving forward for it. Like, it's not your handicap, it's your superpower.
Yeah. So I don't think it's a certain age. I think it's a matter of exposure. And as a psychologist now, I can teach people, like, in terms of what we call like our neural pathways. There's this idea of fixed mindset versus growth mindset. Have you heard of that?
Yes, very lightly.
Right. Okay. So like fixed mindset is I'm not smart, or I'm not good at that, or I'm not an athlete. And we have this idea that we kind of get locked into this mindset. But growth mindset is, well, I could be an athlete or I could get better at something. But when I start to form a new neural pathway, it's going to be hard, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like, I tell people, it's like I'm walking through high blades of grass. There's no path there. So yeah, there's going to be resistance. It's going to be hard, or it's like I'm walking into the ocean and the waves are crashing. And I might lose my footing. But if I keep doing it, if I keep practicing, if I keep, let's say, surfing or something, right, I figure out how to ride those waves and get better at it. And so the more practice I have, like exposure, talking about my scars or talking about my issues or my mental health, the more I do it, the more practice I'm going to have, and I'm going to create a new neural pathway for that.
Yeah.
So then I can learn how to overcome anything.
It's, it's a success principle,
That's right.
Getting uncomfortable.
Yeah. That's right.
It's like, it's what they always say, success is outside of your comfort zone. So it's like,
right.
if you want to achieve whatever success is to you, then
that's right.
Get used to being uncomfortable in whatever way that you need to be uncomfortable. If you want to get uncomfortable, like if you want to start a business, but you're used to a paycheck, skydiving isn't going to help that.
No.
So it's like, figure out
right.
what level of, air quote, uncomfortable you need to do in order to get
that's
that.
Right. How to get out of your comfort zone.
Yeah, just keep it relative to what your goal is. And no, go ahead.
I was going to say, and then, I mean, the interesting thing about psychology too, and where my practice is going now, Jeff, is that, we also learn as therapists, though, not to be very disclosing. So, the whole message is I'm sort of this neutral container, right? And so it's not like I tell my clients my story, because part of me says, well, how relevant is that? Because they're there to talk about them. And so even in my new practice, my new Instagram feed, my new, I write for singles and for couples, and I'm talking about love and relationships. I mean, that all goes into making up who I am as a person and my story. But, you come back to like, how much do I share, right? How much am I vulnerable? And I also share other vulnerability stories about my own struggles in love, for instance, because you want to know that, right? It's the hero's journey. You want to know the hero struggled some, and now they're on the other side.
It's I just had this talk a little bit, or I used this on the call I just had. It's like the 4-minute mile. Yeah. Everybody, scientists, everybody was like, no, your heart's going to explode. It's impossible. Man can't do it. The body can't handle it, so on and so forth. And then somebody did it. Right. And then within a year, like 20, 30 more people did it right after that. And it's like, because now there's an example of somebody that did it. So it's like, oh, now that barrier is gone because it's not impossible. It can be done. Somebody did it.
Right. But before, as you're saying, because there was anxiety, there was fear. The fear is something bad will happen if I do it. And once you start seeing somebody did do it, now nothing's impossible. Yeah. Right.
And I think just there needs to be just so much more authenticity out there, because it is, it's your consumption. What are you looking at? Like, are you looking at the people with the perfect skin and the perfect bodies and, air quote, Photoshop, by the way.
Yes,
and all of that stuff, and then comparing yourself, and then and letting that affect your self-esteem, and especially for people that have been, traumatized by, with whether it be a burn or a disability or anything like that. It's like, well, what are you using as your visual aids in your life to help you get to what you're trying to get to? Are you just constantly looking at like, oh, I'm not like that, so there's something wrong with me? Or are you looking at, an amputee, Eat, Pray, Love, what is his name? Tracy, Eat, Pray, Nub is not, sorry, Eat, Pray, Nub. He's an amputee. Trace Wilson, young guy. And now he's writing children's books as an amputee, and he's creating like a whole superhero thing, and it's an amazing story. And it's like, are you looking at that as your inspiration, saying like, hey, yes, I'm different, but there's nothing wrong with it. I'm just looking in the wrong field,
Oh yeah. And I think absolutely we have to use ourselves and our own experiences. I mean, even moving on from that was my early experience. Then I think what I've done in my career now, where I'm really finding success, is that I also took what were some of my more emotional sort of family stories, and I'm working with something called attachment theory.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what my page is about, Jeff, my Back to Love Doc page, which is that we all have different stories from our very early childhood and how we attached or we didn't to our parents. And that relates then how we attach or we don't in romantic relationships. And so I want to take that and make a real story. And in psychology, there's the terminology for attachment types is very pathological, and it's the titles are negative. It's like
give us some examples.
So John Bowlby was the founder of attachment theory, and he said there's like 4 different types, but the titles are, I'm anxious preoccupied, I'm anxious avoidant, I'm anxious fearful,
Mm-hmm.
Or I'm secure. And that's really what you want to be. But what I have done is I try to take these terms and actually make them more relatable. So I've made characters. I have like nervous Nora, and I have independent Isabel, because nervous Nora sounds better than your anxious Annie, kind of.
Yeah.
And what I want to do is take this and help people understand that everybody has a different type, educate them about that, and then take everything that I've learned in my past 20 years as a clinician and make this relatable to people. And so whatever it is, whether it's your burn story and you want to make that relatable, but that's not my entire story. My story is that also in relationships, I had a very anxious mother and an anxious father. And as a result of that, I had a lot of anxiety in dating and relationships.
You were socially conditioned.
That's exactly right. And people don't realize that your patterns are set by age 2, Jeff.
Yeah. I had a call with Julian Dolan about that, and he's a transformation guy. He's like, no, everything that you're doing right now, it's a cycle. You've been doing the same thing. It might look different on the surface, but you are doing the same thing over and over, and you've been doing it since before you were 6.
That's right. So now the point is, how do I know that about myself? And I know back to these patterns that we have in our head, and how do I break that pattern? Because, I work with singles who want love. But if in their mind they're thinking they actually are relying too much, for instance, the anxious person is looking for a lot of validation from their partner and to be seen, to be heard, and then they get frustrated when they're not getting what they want because they're looking too much to the other person to soothe them, versus the more avoidant kind of independent person has too high a wall around them, so to speak, and they are saying, no, I don't need anybody. I can do this on my own. And so depending on what pattern we have, then we get locked into that pattern, and then we wonder why we can't connect and why we can't be intimate. But it's because of those earliest patterns that were established in our family.
Yeah, and a lot of that, and I don't know how I end up coming. Well, I know how. It's because that's just how my brain works. So I always bring it back to people need to do whatever they need to do to figure out how they can become self-aware, because there's no one shoe fits all. There's no like, oh, this is how I figured it out. This is how I understood what I need.
Yeah.
And obviously, and I think, I just was on a call with yesterday with a therapist, and I think people need to, take down the negative, filter of like, oh, therapy, that's a bad. It's like, no, sometimes you can just go because you need to figure out who you are.
Yeah.
You're searching for something to try and, fulfill you. It's like, no, you need to figure out how to fulfill yourself, so that person that you invite into your life will just add to it and make it better and balance you out.
Right. So we don't know what we don't know, too. And
sure.
I think back to what we were talking about earlier about these athletes and these transformative people who serve as role models. So I'm trying to do the same thing. Back to the burn victims, you need to be surrounded by role models who aren't who are really living life, right?
Yeah.
in relationships, what I'm saying is it's not your fault, that you had these anxious parents or you had these more avoidant parents. And they, by the way, were doing what they learned from from your grandparents.
Yeah,
so
it's passed on.
It's
generational. Yeah.
It's called epigenetics. It goes through many generations and many iterations. But having said that, what I'm also trying to help people is that we have blind spots. You don't even know who you are. You can't see yourself. You don't know what you're doing.
Yep.
So what I've said is there's this character out there, and I've created her, and in fact, I've illustrated her on my feed, and I call her Secure Sophia or Secure Steve. And she is your role model because she, fortunately for her, really just luck, right? That she grew up in a very loving home, unconditionally felt loved and felt safe.
Mm-hmm.
And so she doesn't have the same fears. She or he don't have the same fears or threats in relationship. And so this is ideally who you want to be. So I say to my clients, well, what would Sophia do? Because you already know what you're doing. You're already locked into the anxiety and you're already protecting yourself and you're already worried about being abandoned or rejected and then you're being hurt. But who's this other person? Because we need role models.
Mm-hmm.
So I can be a role model. I can get up there and say, hey, this was my story. I overcame it. An amputee can get up and say, hey, I'm a role model. But you need a relationship role model. Yeah. And so I've created this person who doesn't have the same fears and worries because they physiologically don't feel anxious or worried. And therefore, they're not going to have negative thoughts either.
Yeah. And
so,
that's so much of it, too, is your thought process.
That's what I do because I'm a cognitive behavioral therapist. I was trained at Stanford. And that's what I help my clients do. That's my treatment, cognitive behavioral therapy. So, and it's not just like think positive thoughts. It's about how to explore the negative and say, well, what's the evidence for this thought and how could we reframe it? And there's a whole science on how to work well with cognitive therapy.
Yeah.
But that's where we say, okay, start thinking about role models. Start thinking how you want to be in a relationship. Because if you keep doing more of the same, you're going to get more of the same. And that is what we call insanity, right? Yep. You do the same thing, expecting
over and over again.
Right. So how to then translate this into success in relationships is recognize that we all come from some wounds. We all come from some disappointment, right? Yep. And then say, now I have to have insight into that, but now I also have to push myself back to create a new neural net pathway. I have to now do different behaviors, right? If I want intimacy, I have to be able to figure out how to be vulnerable. I have to figure out how to share. I have to figure out how to mirror my partner. I have to also give what I want to get, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I want love, I have to give love instead of like, what have you done for me lately? It's like, well, where's the couple here? What's the we?
Yeah. That's almost like one of your recent posts with the boundaries be bad sooner. Right. It's like the boundaries that you set on your, like, break those boundaries down.
That's right. So, right. And nervous Nora is going to have different boundary issues because she may not have learned how to set boundaries. Maybe her boundaries are too low. And the independent or avoidant person is going to have too high boundaries and they need to drop those boundaries. So we're back to just depending on who you are, the work is very different. So when people go to therapy, they have to figure out what is their story. And really the beauty of the model is it's never too late to recreate your story, to find a partner and establish healthy boundaries together. And what I love about all of this is it's so positive, Jeff, because the idea is it doesn't matter where I start. It only matters where I end.
Yeah.
And that means if I want to be in a healthy relationship, I can get there. I can be, we say we are wounded in our early relationships, but we can also be healed in relationships. And if we block ourselves off from relationships, then we also block ourselves off from healing.
Yeah.
And so, now as a married person, having gone through my own struggles and really working on my marriage, spending quality time with my husband, and he's very different than me. I'm more of the anxious type that I call like a puppy who needs a lot of attention, and he's more like a cat. and he's a little on the avoidance side, but together we communicate our needs and we talk through things. And it does help that I'm a therapist too.
I was gonna say, how did
Right.
that interview process go? Let me see
You
if you're a qualified candidate for this position.
Okay. No. I joke about this, and my husband's very tolerant and very supportive. But I actually brought him in for a session. I brought him into my office. I mean, can you imagine? I mean,
Oh man, that is.
you gotta be a confident dude to handle that, right?
Oh, I love that. That is so
I'm like,
awesome.
"Hey,
I want that.
Lyle."
I want to see that video.
Oh, yeah. I'm like,
You need
"Okay,
to do
Lyle."
a Facebook Live and like, here's what happened on our first date. Boom. It was
No,
a session.
It wasn't the first date, but so I sat him down and said, "Tell me about your family," and I took notes. And but you know what's interesting? I tell people, listen, if you want to know about your partner, people oftentimes they get into talking about their exes and their
No,
their
yeah.
divorce or their last girlfriend. I'm like, no. Now you have to be careful how you ask the question, right?
Yeah.
But you do have to understand your partner. Like, who were they as a child? How did they grow up? What did they learn? What do they need when they're stressed out? Do they need space? Do they need closeness? And if you take that information and then work with that, it's amazing how you can learn how to approach your partner in the way they need to be approached.
Yeah. So many people like they get into the relationship, right? You know, and of course you have all the googly and the, you know, the emission of the hormones and like, oh, yeah, no, you hang up. No, you hang up. Once all of that is done,
Yeah.
you know, and then you meet, you know, the representative that you
That's
met
right.
is
Right.
gone. Now you meet the actual person.
Yep.
Then you get frustrated with all the things that are not like you. And then you're trying to like, you view everything that they do through the filter of how you expect them to be, which is like you. But it's like, if they were exactly like you wouldn't be with them.
Oh, so Jeff, this is perfect. So what I say is the problem is, I think I say it this way. We approach love like the golden rule, right? The golden rule is do unto others the way you would like them to be done unto, right? The way you would like to be done unto.
Yeah.
And right, we take our own perspective. Like, I see myself as this emotional, sensitive person, and I imagine that I would approach my partner with such sensitivity and I would be so caring. But even then, it's not accurate because it's what we perceive, right?
Yep.
But what we really have to do in love and relationships is do what we call the platinum rule. And the platinum rule is do unto your partner the way they want to be done unto. So that's a relationship where I'm not doing what I think I want. I'm doing what you need.
No,
And
I like that.
right? If people can learn this is one of my most famous quotes, and I can't take credit for coming up with it, but the platinum rule is really what we need in relationships, is to meet our partners where they are and to meet their needs. And once you do that, then there's reciprocity, right? If you can make them feel loved and safe and secure and meet their needs, then they'll do the same for you.
Yeah.
And
It's a reap what you sow.
That's exactly
You
right.
know, it still really falls under the golden rules, because do unto others as you would like. So what do you need to do to your partner? I want to be loved the way I need to be loved. So
Right.
therefore I need to love them the way that they need to be loved.
That's right. Because if you really look, at somebody's love language and you look at what they're doing, they're also giving you so many cues. There's so many tells.
Yeah.
If you watch their body language, like if somebody keeps giving you gifts, for instance, right? They're a gift giver.
Yeah.
Secretly, what they want is gifts.
They want gifts. Yeah.
So if you're giving them something else, they're like, okay, great, thanks, but that's not really me, right? I keep giving you peanut M&Ms, but you don't like peanut M&Ms. You want flowers or whatever it is. We just have to pay attention.
Yeah. Hopefully they're not allergic to peanuts.
That's right. That's right. Right. We just have to be curious, and we have to be conscientious. And I know even in my career as a therapist, Jeff, what I love also about being a therapist is there's many things. I mean, it's a long, long route of education. I mean, it was 4 years of undergraduate, 2 years of a master's, a 4-year doctorate, a pre-doc, a post-doc, getting licensed. I mean, it went on and on, right?
There's a reason you put doc in everything.
That's right.
I earned it. I paid my dues. Like, I'm putting doctor on everything.
That's right.
It's on my license.
And there's even pros and cons to having a license because I can't work out of state, et cetera, et cetera. But having said that, we come back to you can recreate yourself. And I think the beauty of the field for me is that I've worked in so many different areas, right? Given my own personal story, that became my volunteer work. Now I also work for a mental health charity. Then I worked with children, and then I worked with seniors. And now I'm coming back to my passion, which is relationships. So it's been so wonderful for me because I could take my own personal story, my early parent experience, that becomes my attachment style theory, working with that cognitive behavioral therapy wise. I could take my own experience as a burn victim and use that in my volunteering. And I think if you want to be successful, right, you find something that has personal meaning for you.
Yep.
Right. And the closer you are to that meaning, then you are really a champion for other people.
Absolutely. And and you're living this
That's
practice right now. And because what people really, they're socially conditioned to think of self first. And with respect, you need to make sure you're taking care of yourself. Otherwise, you're never going to be able to help anybody else. But another approach or a secondary approach to is like, once you take care of yourself, like, help others, like, find a way to help others, because it's a universal law, and when you help others, you end up helping yourself.
Oh yeah. I mean, nothing is a bigger compliment to me, Jeff, that I've helped somebody with their mood. I've helped somebody with their marriage. I've helped save a marriage, a relationship. I mean, I can't get a better compliment, right? It fulfills me. It helps them. And I think you just have to be specific. We all have different gifts and talents, right? Yeah. And we all come to this in a different way. And if you keep it close to the chest, and you do something that you feel passionate about, and people will feel it, right? They'll feel how authentic you are. They'll understand your story. And I think as I'm also, and I think the challenge for me has been, because as psychologists, we're not told to share that much. And I'm part of like a community of other therapists, and we all talk about this. But the more you do share, then it makes it real, right? So the struggle, I say, okay, 76% of people are insecure. You can't feel bad about that, but now what, right?
Yeah.
So I have statistics on this, and I'm studying this, and I'm doing research, and I'm writing a book, and I'm going to think about doing programs. And I'm just getting started, and I'm midlife. And I think
you're still early.
Yeah. No, but it's exciting to me. I don't think I've ever felt as passionate as I have, because now I get to be creative too. And that's really what's fun for me.
Wow. I like that. Usually you don't hear a lot of, because you hear psychiatry, you hear these types of things, you think, oh, very stringent and
no
rules and regulations. And now you're like, no, I want to be creative. And, then again, of course, your inspiration was Lucy. So, so it's like, you got it. Like, you're going to set up your little wooden desk and your stand with your little money jar. And
okay. Thank God I'm charging more than 5 cents. But, right. Yeah.
Maybe add a few zeros and decimals and commas in there, and take off the cent sign. But,
Jeff, I think that's the other thing that my whole message too is, you got to be bold, and you got to be colorful, and you can't take yourself too seriously. And I say, like, you could be, when we're anxious and we come from this place of fear and worry, it's like we're just heavy, right? We're like self-absorbed. It's like you're in this little jar. Mm-hmm. And if you could step out of that and see your beauty and see your strength and see your confidence, there's like a lightening up. And then who doesn't want to be around somebody who is light and confident? It's contagious.
Yeah.
And right. And the more you let your light shine, and you're not so worried about protecting yourself, then that's, there's not a lot of scientific evidence to the law of attraction, but you are emanating energy, right?
Yeah, we don't need scientific evidence. Just asking, it's just asking of people.
Oh my gosh, right? Who do you want to be around? You want to be around somebody confident. It's contagious, right? So I think there's just a way to blend this all together, right? You take your personal story. How do you make that into something? How do you make that personal for yourself? How to package that in a way that's appealing? Again, my whole goal is to take the stigma out of the therapy, take these negative psychological terms and make them into something just more relatable. Mm-hmm. And then that's become my brand. And so my brand is about, bright pink and fuchsia and turquoise. And I have a vision about that. I want my quotes to be something that people remember, that they can, pass along to other people. And so
bring some happiness back into their life.
So I have 3 goals for my feed. I want to educate people, I want to inspire them, and I also want to make them laugh. And that's the fun part. So I throw in some funny, couple of funny memes and a couple of funny cartoons. And if it strikes the right balance, right, then that's really something. And again, then I get positive feedback, and it's more reinforcing for me to want to do more of it.
For sure. And so just to give a little context on your feed and a little bit of the comic relief that you share. So here's one of her posts. It's I broke up with my boyfriend due to religious differences. He thought he was God and I didn't. Yeah. I'm just like, well, we are.
Well, and the whole point
in our world,
But the serious part of the post was about narcissism, right? And so I'm trying to educate people about what does it mean to be a narcissist. And so, and the truth is, I sort of take these things for second nature because I've studied them for so long, and I sort of forget. I got to stop and go back and redefine and tell people what these terms are, because we throw a lot of the terms around lightly, right?
Yeah.
And and I just want to bring it back and that's my mix, right? That's my staple, to be a little funny, but then a little serious.
There's a message behind it.
Yeah.
And then I know we're coming up on time here, but really quickly, can you kind of share on just the importance of pursuing happiness and not approval? Because I think it's such a big thing, especially when people are dealing with being burn victims or disabilities or anything like that. But just, coming from your background, and with what you do with your practice, I think there's a lot of just pursuing approval and fake, and I think there's a lot of layers in there.
Happiness is a weird thing, and what I say to people is, instead of thinking about these obscure kind of concepts, I say set goals for yourself, Jeff. So I'm a rational person, and I say goals should be measurable and obtainable. Yeah. If I have anxiety about a scar, if I have anxiety about a relationship, what's a measurable goal to get there? So I'm going to, if I have anxiety about people, I'm going to introduce myself to 5 different people and say hello at this meeting. You have to have tangible things that drive you in that direction, because fear is not going to go away without action. You have to think positive. You have to say, this is only in my head. I have to overcome it. But these things don't go away easily. I have to be aggressive. So I say to people, invest anxiety in a calmer future. The more you put yourself out there, the more you invest, it will get calmer. Again, you'll form a new neural pathway down the way, but you have to do it. You have to have actionable things. Happiness is not as actionable. What are the goals to happiness? Mm-hmm. I'm going to work out more. I'm going to eat healthier. I'm going to sleep better. You have to have concrete things to get you there.
Love that.
So I'll leave you with that.
No, that was perfect. Like if you had the mic, you'd just boom, drop it.
Drop the mic. Awesome.
No, I love it. And then, so I know you're on Instagram. I'll throw in a quick blurb. If you guys want to know about your love style or your partner's love style, make sure you check out her website, secureinlove.com.
Yes.
And your Instagram handle is Back to Love Doc, right? So just Back to Love DOC, and 2 is spelled out. And,
that's right.
But yeah, anywhere else that people can find you or anything like that?
You know, Jeff, I've got more stuff coming. I got to revamp my website and everything. But yeah, I'll announce everything on Instagram. Yes.
Perfect. Love it.
Perfect.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much for
so
your
much.
time. This was an amazing
Okay.
call. You have a wonderful day.
You too now. Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey guys, thank you for joining. I hope you enjoyed that episode of Glass Talks. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you tell your friends too, because we got a lot more coming for you, and I know you're going to love it.